welcome back once again to another edition of Ugly American Sports. Rowdy C here, along with Brandon Helms, back again. Glad we were able to, and apologize in advance that we were having to record this. It's not doing it live, but it was best we could do under our own schedules and everything.
Yeah, my fault on that.
Before we get started to the main top topic, I definitely need to, of course, bring up the very sad news coming today and send out our best regards. Bill Russell, greatest winner in sports history, 11-time NBA champion, only one of 3 people by my count to have won high school state champion, NCAA national champion, NBA champion, and Olympic gold medal, died today at the age of 88. Absolute true legend in all of sports history. So yeah, it was definitely sad to have seen that go on, and it is kind of ironic that we're talking about someone who won at, managed to win, especially at the college level, because we're kind of getting back into that subject. You may recall last time I had this guy on the show, we were talking about the absolute insanity involving realignment in college sports that was, at the time, was spurred on by University of Texas and University of Oklahoma deciding they were leaving the Big 12 for the SEC. That ended up leading to a domino effect in which the Big 12 grabbed everyone from Houston to Memphis, I believe, to BYU in Central Florida just to stay afloat.
Cincinnati, not Memphis.
Cincinnati, gotcha.
Memphis wants it very badly.
Well, yeah, we may get to that in a bit, but
it may happen.
But anyway, as I was saying, well, to the surprise of nobody, at least I wasn't surprised, things since then have only gotten worse. Now, as you probably might be aware, in the last few months, the reports have come in, UCLA and USC, University of Southern California, they want out of the Pac-12, whatever number it is now, and moving into the Big 10, 16, whatever. Just keep this in mind. They're basically moving into switching to the other conference that those two teams have traditionally played in the Rose Bowl. And that's only led to one more domino effects after another. People wondering, are other Pac-12 teams like Oregon and Arizona, are they going to the Big 12? This talk about, is the SEC going to poach more ACC teams, I think. The SEC, still for this moment, continues to suggest that they have no plans of further expansion, but I don't think anyone's really buying that very well. And just think, go back over here, what I'm missing here. Sorry. But yeah, and the biggest thing is just everyone seems to be almost encouraging that this might be the end, hoping that this is going to be the end of the NCAA altogether.
I'm not going to say it's going to be the end of the NCAA, but it's going to be the end of the NCAA as we know it. There's just, you're stockpiling too many teams and too many too few conferences.
Right, you're basically going from the Big 5 to the Big 2.
Yeah, and
almost
that's
pretty
essentially
much
what this looks like. This is trying to make this to be a minor league system, and then you've got paying for players and NIL coming up in the transfer portal, and it's not even close to what we grew up with as students just 2 decades ago. And, I'm of the opinion that college sports should be about your team versus their team, your student body versus their student body, and, recruiting, okay, whatever. Everybody wants to play for Alabama, and it's still students. It just doesn't feel like we're getting there. This feels like a money grab, first and foremost, and only.
And I'll tell you this much. Like I said, I have been, the more and more I've been looking at this. And I said this back when the first thing happened with the UT Oklahoma thing. And now with this, it's only seeming more and more eerily coincidental. This more or less seems very, very similar to what happened last year with what the debacle overseas that became known as the Europe Super League. Now, just in case anybody watching this is unaware of the situation of what happened there, back around last year, around April or May, I want to say it was, about 12 to 14 of the biggest name soccer clubs in Europe which sadly, yes, included my guys over at Arsenal, basically made the decision that they were going to form a whole new European competition that, for all intents, was following the format of American sports. This was going to be more or less a closed-in competition. It was going to follow the format of full round-robin regular season, then playoffs. And oh yes, the one thing that really got on people's nerves, at least for the first 20 years, there would be no promotion and relegation in this. And I've said this for the longest time, that the closest thing that we have in American sports to the format of European and overseas soccer is the NCAA in college sports. College basketball in particular. Yeah. And that's, it was back here. Now here's what you need to know, that this new league they were forming, there were two things that basically caused it to basically die down in literally a matter of days. First was the massive fan backlash from so many of these clubs as fans who, surprise, surprise, actually liked the traditional format of competing in your national league with a promotion and relegation system and earning matchups against other clubs in other areas through qualifying for the Champions League and whatnot. I think that was apparently what spurred on Chelsea to be the first club that announced they were backing out. Now, of course, that was before, two clubs, Bayern Munich and Paris Saint-Germain, they basically rejected the offers from the beginning. We might get to that later because I think there was some ulterior motives as to why they were doing that. But basically, Chelsea bowed out. Almost all the English clubs bowed out eventually. First was the fan backlash. The second was this. Now, this is the one difference that would happen between these clubs that form the Europe Super League. And we need to take this get this in advance right now. So far, there are no claims. There's been no attempts by any of these colleges in America to actually break free of the NCAA. This might just still be speculation among media members and whatnot who want the NCAA to die, more or less.
Yeah,
for one reason or another. There's
been talk that the upper echelon is going to break off into their own division for years now, and obviously nothing happened. And I'm of the opinion this is those schools taking matters into their own hands, making their own deal. I mean, we've been frustrated for years in major sports where some teams won't play other teams because of the perception of playing a lower tier school, whatever. This is going to exacerbate that beyond another scale. They're just going to play them. Essentially, you're going to see a non-conference schedule with a couple of play-in games, and then the Big Ten versus the SEC.
More or less, you might think. But like I said, at the very least, I could say this. The clubs that were trying to form the Europe Super League at no point in time said they wanted to break free of UEFA and their own national leagues. This was more or less supposed to be just an additional competition that these big-name clubs would be exclusively competing in. It was UEFA and the leagues themselves, like the Premier League, that more or less stepped in, flexed their muscles, and said, no way. You join this European Super League, you're out of UEFA, you're out of your national competition, and if you want to come back here, you have to sign in writing that you will never form any type of competition like the Super League ever again. That, more than anything, was what caused most of those clubs trying to back out, because they wanted all the money, more or less. They expected that the Europe Super League was going to generate probably more cash than either the Champions League or the Premier League combined, but they still wanted the money from the Premier League and the Champions League and whatnot. Now, whether or not these schools here on this side, think that they can form a competition that generates more money than the NCAA to the point where they could tell the NCAA they could do without not just the money from college football, because let's face it, this is all being driven by college football, but also do without all the money that's currently being generated now thanks to new TV contracts the NCAA has, not just with basketball, but with baseball, women's softball. They're getting a bunch of whole nother deals here. And that's the big question is the NCAA, or the, let's call them the rogue schools, more or less. We don't know if they're going rogue yet, but we'll just use that term for the sake of argument here. If the rogue schools are going to be willing to separate without that money.
Yeah, that money is kind of a rounding error. I've read a couple good articles during the NCAA tournament about how the women don't get units, and what that means for the tournament is every time you play a game, your conference gets a piece of the pie. I think it's, for men's basketball, something in the range of 600,000. Well, women doesn't have units, even though ESPN is doing it. Now, that doesn't mean it's not going to happen in the future, and that could be where the sticking point is. But, the only counter I would say to that is these big schools, by all appearances, have run the NCAA for years. I mean, that's how we went to splitting up Division I football into 1A and 1AA, and that's how we've gone from making a certain number of sports requirements to field at this level and all that kind of other stuff, as they've always tried to say, Louisiana Monroe's below us, so here's how to do it, and then these little schools do what they can to hit that level, and then the goalposts change again.
That's why I would say probably the most likely scenario I would think that would come out of all of this is you might be seeing another such split in the tiers of college football at the very least. I guess, because the main thing that just sticks to me is, like I said, this is not just me saying why I can't see a breakup of the NCAA coming, but also why it kind of irks me to see so many people who seem like they want the NCAA to die. Now, let me say this first and foremost. Again, I posted kind of stuff like this on Facebook before, stuff like, I'm not going to deny that the NCAA, like most authority organizations, has its share of flaws. But the solution there is finding ways to correct those flaws within the organization, not break up the whole thing, because I think with so many people, all they see is college football here, and they're not thinking, like, if the NCAA breaks up, what happens to all the other sports, like basketball, not just basketball and baseball, but softball, track, swimming and diving, golf, equestrian even. And yet, I've heard the arguments over and over when people say that they'll get the money because football funds them. It's not just about the money.
No, that's not true either. So.
That's the thing. But the main thing is who's going to organize competitions for these other sports. I guarantee you, this small group of rogue schools, if they wanted to form their own athletic organization completely independent of the NCAA, they're not thinking about trying to organize full schedules for collegiate soccer and diving. And that's why I think more than anything that people forget is that an organization like the NCAA, flaws and all, is still needed basically to protect the smaller schools and the smaller programs. Now again, and that's why, first off, there's no doubt in my mind that this has all been happening just as Mark Emmert announced here that he was retiring as the head of the NCAA. And this all might be pulling for these larger schools to probably get someone who's going to lean in their favor even more. But that's what I've been saying, more or less. And even someone as me as a liberal democracy supporter and everything, but when it comes to something as independent and if it's not government like the NCAA, I'm gonna say right here, I don't think this is going to happen. But college sports and the NCAA, the next head, really needs to be an authoritarian dictator.
I won't go that far. What I think is they need somebody who's just going to stand up. A great example is with the NCAA tournament in basketball. What sells the most headline space, and attracts the most viewers are when the little guy wins.
Right.
And somebody needs to be able to tell Michigan, Alabama, Texas, whatever, hey, y'all are great, y'all will make your spot, but nobody's tuning in for you guys at the level that they turn in for these upsets.
That is one of the biggest arguments I go back and forth with on people on social media and some of these sports groups I follow that claim that they basically of saying that an extended playoff in college football will never work because no one wants to see Alabama hang 100 on Georgia State all the time.
Well, you ain't hanging 100 on anybody who can make
more or
it,
less.
So.
That's maybe a slight exaggeration.
No,
but
I get it.
saying,
I get it. But that's kind of the
right.
attitude that people have is that these little schools don't belong. And, Cincinnati proved it. They didn't get blown out.
Yeah.
But everybody said they didn't belong. They competed. They were in it. They just...
And even before Cincinnati, back in the days of the BCS, you had Boise State beating Oklahoma. You had TCU beating Wisconsin in the Rose Bowl. I think Utah got a bowl victory, a BCS bowl victory as well. It has been proven that some of these, especially the closest we have to mid-major schools in football, can pull it off with the opportunity. And that's why I've always said, it's not that these people believe these smaller schools can't win. It's that they're afraid they can.
And that's my problem. 100% is they don't want to share that piece. They don't want to do all this. But again, if I'm the NCAA, they need to be able to stand up. Now, the problem is the big schools have said, fine, we'll break off. And the NCAA is terrified that'll happen.
Well, that's why I think you need someone who can more or less plant his foot and say, okay, you want to basically do what the heads of UEFA did with the Europe Super League and say, look, you guys leave. You guys split off and try to form a new college football division. You're not just going to go without the money we can still generate from any college football contracts you have. You're going to lose all the revenue generated from our men's basketball tournament and all of our TV contracts with that, from the new contracts we have with college baseball on ESPN, with college softball on ESPN. We are getting all of these new TV contracts with ESPN and CBS and the like. You're without all that money.
Well, and the funny thing is cable viewership shrinking to begin with, and TV eyes are shrinking. So at some point, there's going to be a negative return. And
that's a subject for a whole other time. Absolutely. Believe me, I've looked into that for a long time, and whatnot. But basically, that's why you start with that, and that's when you get the opportunity that you have you might be able to, and it would basically start with. You get some new guy in the head of the NCAA. This guy goes to a network like Fox or NBC, and anyone else who might, and maybe even throw in someone who has a streaming package and whatnot and that, and you negotiate with them the rights to host a full 8-16 college football playoff tournament. Then you go to the other schools. You need to hold this big meeting, and basically you get the support of all the smaller schools that, when in numbers, will greatly outrank the big schools, and you push for a complete complete conference realignment, basically on the level of, I've said this before, of what the UIL has here in Texas with high school football. Everything is organized back on geographic boundaries and whatnot. I have made a whole ton of spreadsheets in my own personal time trying to reorganize the state of 1A college football just because I have no life and whatnot and that such. And just, you find a way to get back to where everything is regionalized. It's, if you have college conference championships, it's between two divisions or whatnot of maybe two conference alignments and whatnot. And maybe that's the first round of the playoffs and whatnot. And you just, basically that just putting in a guy who will maintain some type of order back, at least in college football as well, and by default, order in all the other college sports who are more or less going to suffer from all of this consolidation into ginormous conferences as it is. And that's when and basically you're able to basically put your foot down and stand firm that say, look, we hold the TV contracts, not just for football, but all these other sports. You want this money. We know you want all this money, so you do as we say. Now, is that going to happen? Are we going to get someone running the NCAA like that? Very likely not.
Yeah, and see, I'm even okay with some sort of stratification within geography because Incarnate Word and the University of Texas Austin, they're not in the same level, and no one's going to pretend that they are. So from that standpoint, I see now doesn't mean the Cardinals can't get a knockoff upset here and there, just like Abilene Christian did over the Longhorns in the tournament. I mean, again, a small school beating a big school is what sells the headlines there,
Right.
which is still my point. So I'm even okay with a regionalized SEC, but we now have a Los Angeles school in the same conference as a New Jersey school. I mean, this is essentially Major League Baseball. This is essentially the NBA. This is the NFL. Like, the whole point of amateur athletics is we look forward as UTA alums playing North Texas because we know a lot of people from North Texas, and it's a bragging right. Remember that stretch where we had like 5 wins in a row?
Oh yes.
And that's what I'm like. That's hey, how'd you basketball? You know, and
Oh yeah, it was so much fun seeing local radio personality George Junham just grind his gears that we kept beating his school.
Well, and are you going to have Rutgers fans and UCLA fans in them? It's not going to have the same effect.
No, in fact, I've double checked this. Even in the years since they joined, like the Big 12 conference football games that generate the smallest ticket prices on the secondary market always involve West Virginia. Like, no one in the else in the conference is interested in playing West Virginia. And I've seen people talk online, West Virginia fans talk online, saying that, yeah, the novelty has worn off playing a lot of these other schools for on the other side of the Mississippi and whatnot. West Virginia belongs in a conference that has the likes of a Pitt or Virginia, Syracuse, and whatnot, and any of these other Eastern Bloc schools and whatnot.
I'm really hopeful that alone is what's going to stop all this in a couple years, because in the end, ticket sales are your greatest single source of revenue that you are in complete control of. And if you start to see that slip and the donors don't care anymore because they can't get excited to play Indiana, that's going to solve the problem.
And I've always said like this: college, and some people still think I'm crazy by saying this, but the college sports market is in a bubble situation right now, where once all of the big, rich, old boomer donors and supporters start dying out in the next 20 years or so, you're going to be left with a student fan base and an alumni fan base that's not going to have that rah-rah sis boom bah attitude, especially because the majority of them are they're more concerned about paying off their student loans than giving money to the football program and whatnot. And yes, the fact that you don't have that regional rivalry atmosphere as well, the enthusiasm for the sports by the younger generation is just not going to be there, and it's going to be a bubble bursting on just how much money and popularity goes into college sports and college football especially.
Yeah, I mean, say what you will, at least on the SEC side, they annex people that at least are on their borders, with Texas, Oklahoma, and they'll have a rivalry, and there's a rivalry that exists between Arkansas, and then, of course, LSU and Texas fans. So at least from some semblance, that makes sense. But we have a coast-to-coast conference now.
Oh, yeah.
And that's insane.
And just keep in mind, that was what killed the Big East.
Yep. 100%.
They tried to do that as well, admittedly just to try to survive because the ACC was poaching off so many Big East teams, and it just led to an absolute collapse of whatnot. And I'm wondering if, like I said, there hasn't been any serious moves about ACC teams leaving and whatnot for the SEC or whatnot, but it makes me wonder if eventually schools like Duke, NC State, North Carolina, and whatnot would get fed up with that and basically do a breakup like the Catholic 7 did with the Big East all those years ago.
Yeah, it's just been proven in a couple of very small but noticeable scenarios. Large conferences don't work. The WAC
Overtime, no. Overtime, they do. There's just too many egos to try to sate all the way.
Think about this: if you're a coach that gets a contract bonus for a conference championship, and you now got at best a 1 in 20 shot. I mean, if you're even in Alabama, adding programs that eventually at some point you're going to lose the game and another team doesn't, and that's a large source of personal revenue for you. So they're not going to be happy with this. I mean, there's just no real upside to this, other than the network saying, we got these marquee teams. And how long are these marquee teams going to stay marquee teams when they're not winning conference championships and getting playoff berths and stuff like that? And it's going to happen because you see this in like Georgetown was a very, very, very well-known name in college basketball. And now they're just they did something some time ago. Yeah, I remember that.
That might be. Well, we have to wait and see. That, for what's worth, Georgetown was one of the schools of those Catholic
Right.
seven that broke off and said we're going to do our own thing, and hopefully we'll have a basketball-only conference that we can compete in. So there may be some other things contributing to why they've fallen on lesser times nowadays.
And my point for bringing that up is more like you don't win, you don't stay in the limelight. It's simple as that. I remember back in the day, Arkansas was a very, very well-known football name. What have they done since joining the SEC?
Oh,
and now they celebrate when they get an occasional New Year's Day bowl.
I mean, Arkansas's basically only been a better basketball team more than a football team since then, because they at least won a national championship out of the SEC in 1994, I believe it was. Yep. Now, of course, since then it's been kind of hit and miss on that. But yeah,
let's take Kentucky. Kentucky can't be happy with this basketball conference, and now that's going to affect their seedings and stuff like that because occasionally Auburn rises up or whatever, but you're basically dealing with football first, second, third.
That is the main thing. Yeah, is how much are the basketball schools in these major conferences? Duke, Kentucky, Kansas, maybe even Indiana out of the Big Ten and whatnot. How much times are they going to get fed up with having to restructure everything just because of football and everything?
It's funny because looking at Kansas, the Big 12 is the only major conference that seemed to have gotten better in basketball because of all these moves, but you can't tell me USC brings something to the table for the Big Ten.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't tell me that Oklahoma brings something to the table for the SEC. I mean, this is all about a named football school for the media contracts for ESPN, Fox, whatever. That's all this is about. It's not about competition for anything other than that.
Right. And even how even with these with these mergers, there's still egos going in and out of everything. Just from the fact that now you know that they're conference rivals again, Texas A&M is doing whatever they can to try to avoid playing Texas, whatnot, because they want to do these pods, more or less, of 4 teams each. Right. That the only ones you guarantee to play in the SEC every year, and A&M doesn't want to be in the same pod as Texas and whatnot. Right. It's like everyone wants to see Texas and Texas A&M play, except the people at Texas A&M, at least. Maybe even the people at Texas, I don't know about that much.
Some do, but A&M was always, we're in the SEC now, so we're clearly a better school, and they don't want, again, I'm a firm, you know what, we've taken it in the nose to North Texas the last couple of years, and I'm of the opinion, let's play again this year.
Oh, yeah.
Done. Like, there's no, the Sun Belt was better in CSUA these few years. Let's just play it on the court and settle it that way. Be done with it.
And you and I will say how happy we are that UTA is back in the same conference as Stephen F. Austin. Yeah. How much we enjoyed watching those matchups.
I hope that gets back to where we were when we were students.
And the fact that we're getting even more proximity opponents like Abilene Christian and Tarleton State. Yeah. This has made me at least more excited again for college sports and college basketball than I've been in quite a few years. Yeah. And it's largely because we're finally, maybe we don't get to play Texas State or UT San Antonio or some of those schools that we did like traveling to, but what we're getting can suffice, I think, at least. And it might still be fun.
My only regret with that move is we had developed a pretty good rivalry. And Texas State was reciprocating. Like, when we were students, y'all don't have football, so we don't really care. And even though you could see that there was a small attendance bump when we would play SFA, for the most part, we didn't feel like they felt the same way we did towards them. And Texas State did. So that I'm going to miss. San Antonio, I don't really ever feel like anybody got up for them. That we just kind of were there. Like, if you look at the attendance numbers, it was pretty flat compared to other games, but Texas State was different. But that's, again, another example of we built something, they built something, and now it's gone because of realignment.
Yeah.
But we're hoping, at least on our sake, it may have worked out.
Yeah.
What else is By the way, can you imagine Texas State's now on an island in the Sun Belt on their own? I wonder how long that's going to last.
Yeah, for maybe not very long. And because I just got a big feeling that this is far from over, and we're just going to see, and again, unless the NCAA gets someone who's able to have an iron hold on these schools and try to get them to start working with each other instead of always trying to get bigger and bigger in some kind of, let's just say, phallic envy of who wants the bigger conference and whatnot. Things are going to be incredibly, crazy is the best term I can think of it to say it.
If
but what's
history
going to
repeats
happen
itself, it's gonna come crashing down.
And just hopefully we're going to be able to pick up the pieces and rebuild something from what comes up.
Yep.
I do hope we're going to have some more live Ugly American Sports next time. I'll hopefully bring a friend of mine from the D.C. area to, we're probably talking about some baseball trade deadline talk next time. He's from the D.C. area, so he's probably been watching the Juan Soto deal with much attention, whatnot. Hopefully we'll have stuff to talk about there next Sunday. But in the meantime, I do want to thank again my buddy Brandon Helms for joining up on this. Hopefully find ways to bring him back in some more discussions. Maybe I can get him into some of this European soccer, whatnot. Although he's always said he can never figure out how people can pay attention to so many competitions from one team at the same time.
I don't get it, but...
Well, it might be easier than dealing with multiple sports at the same time and all that.
Probably just a retraining of the mind.
Perhaps. But thanks again for this edition of Ugly American Sports. We'll see you next time. Until then, stay rowdy, my friends.